Hello and welcome to our next video in our Introduction to Mindfulness course. This video is the first of a series that looks at non-judgment and holding a non-judgmental attitude. And in this video I want to take some time to kind of define what is meant by judgment and non-judgment in mindfulness. When we think of the word judgment in the English language, it kind of has a connotation of something being very definitive, something legal and perhaps critical of someone else. Whereas in mindfulness, it kind of has a much broader meaning. When we think of mindfulness and therefore Buddhism, which is where mindfulness finds its roots, love is defined as the absence of judgment. So a much broader definition, and we're going to get into some of that now. When we think of how things are in our lives, we instantly form opinions based on our values and our beliefs and our experiences. Whereas mindfulness can help us to start the process of reflecting on things as they actually are, rather than what our initial reaction is. And we do that by using the three main pillars of mindfulness. Being aware. What am I actually thinking? What am I actually feeling? Being non-judgmental. This is what this situation, this is what this person is or their behaviour is. And living in the present moment helps us to not reflect on what has happened previously in our lives or what might happen in the future, to actually reflect and to respond on the situations as we actually find them at that moment, and not to let our thoughts and our responses be clouded by stuff that has happened in the past or the impact that it might have on us. That helps us to respond in a much more useful and practical way. If we go into that a little bit more deeply and start to think about how we can tell if we're responding in a judgmental way or having a judgmental attitude. If we find ourselves using words like should, would, could, or shouldn't, or wouldn't, or couldn't, or my favourite that crops up for so many of us on a daily basis with wanting things to be normal. As I put in a post on my Facebook page, I keep a card that was sent to me from a therapist that I worked with personally years ago. And it simply says on the front that there is no such thing as normal. If we remember that things are the way that they are, and they may not necessarily be our conceived idea of normal, they are just the way that they are. And if we can peel back from thinking about the way things should be, or the way things could be, or the way things what could be more normal for us, then that helps us to respond to the way things are and to respond in a much more productive and much more positive and much more useful way. So holding a non-judgmental attitude in terms of mindfulness is to really think now about the language that we use, either when we speak out loud or in our internal dialogue when we're responding to the events that happen in our lives or the way that we think about ourselves. This is particularly important, in my opinion, and based on my experience, for people with fibromyalgia, because if your life has been impacted or is currently being impacted by the things that you would want to be able to do, or the things that you could or should or would be able to do as a result of living with the symptoms of fibromyalgia, these are all judgments that you're holding of yourself. If we can start to change that language that we use in our inner dialogue, it means that we can respond much more positively, much more practically to the circumstances in which you find yourself. If you are currently experiencing a fibro flare, and that you have to rest and recuperate for a period of time, if you're laying in bed or laying on the sofa or the couch thinking about the things that you should or would or could be doing if that experience wasn't happening to you at that right then, it's going to start to create all sorts of negative feelings about yourself and about your life and about the relationships that you have with other people. If we can learn very gently to start to change the language that we use in our inner dialogue, to accept the fact that at this moment in time, in that example, you are experiencing a fibromyalgia flare, and that to be kind and non-judgmental of yourself, then I believe that that will help that to pass more quickly, or to get to a stage where you are feeling much more comfortable to do the things that you would want to be able to do as you go about your life. Holding a judgmental opinion of yourself particularly is really damaging, because it doesn't actually add any value to you overall. If you're laying there or sitting there thinking about things that you should or would or could be doing, Well, that is taking up energy, emotional energy and mental energy that you could be using to help you to recover and to recuperate and to rest much more quickly. So what I want us to do is I want us to start to think about the language that we're using the awareness that we've learned in the earlier sections to think about the things that we're thinking, particularly when we're thinking about ourselves and thinking about other people. What are we saying about ourselves? Are we saying that we want to be normal? We should, would, could, or shouldn't, wouldn't, couldn't do these things if it either as a result of fibromyalgia or as a result of our earlier experiences and opinions and values and belief. Part of holding a non-judgmental attitude reaches right into the very principal philosophies of Buddhism, which kind of are the foundation stones of mindfulness. And we're going to look more at the philosophies in later sections, because it is fascinating. And they are quite different to perhaps some of the ways in which we think about very profound things, such as what it means to be human and life and all that sort of stuff. But I just want to touch on one of the core philosophies of Buddhism and therefore mindfulness is that everything is constantly changing. There is nothing in life that remains the same throughout the entirety of our life. An example that's often given is if you think of a bunch of flowers that is sitting there in a vase on the mantelpiece or wherever, that it looks really beautiful to start with, but if you give it a week, then that starts to wilt and it starts to ultimately die. The more we want that bunch of flowers to remain as beautiful as it was when it was first cut and arranged, the more we're going to be disappointed, the more we're going to be upset and frustrated. If we can accept the fact that that bunch of flowers is in a constant state of change and that eventually we're going to have to put it out into the bin, then we can start to become more accepting of that. That bunch of flowers is the same as everything else that goes on in our lives. In Buddhism, we are the core philosophy, wanting something that is in a constant state of change to remain the same, is always going to cause us discomfort and upset. So start to allow that kind of concept to sit with you, that wanting things to be different, even though they are the way that they are, is essentially a judgment. Using language about ourselves, should, would, could, normal, is going to cause us frustration, it's going to cause us upset, it's going to cause us to become depressed if things aren't the way that we want them to be immediately. Accepting things as they are helps us to think more practically and more positively about them. This is a challenging topic, and it is a very unusual way initially to start to think about things. And it also helps us to manage the stress and strain of day-to-day life. So a brief introduction then of holding a non-judgmental attitude. There's a meditation exercise immediately after this video, and we're going to start to look at holding a non-judgmental attitude in a very practical way in the following videos. There we're going to look at some practical tools that you can use to challenge some of the thoughts that you're having about yourself, challenge some of the thoughts that you're having about other people and the relationships that you have, and also going to use some really practical tools on saying no, establishing boundaries, and also managing any more challenging, perhaps conflicting conversations with other people in your life. So I think this is going to be really useful. A lot of my clients have had some pretty life-changing results as a result of this element of mindfulness. It is going to be challenging because this is where we start very gently the process of challenging and changing some of the thoughts that we have of ourselves. So I'm really excited to share this part of the course with you. I want you to start to take some notes and start to reflect on some of the things that we're talking about right from the start as we kind of start the process of moving into the more detailed stuff that you can use in your day-to-day life. Thanks very much.